that. So yeah, let's go out this year with a bang, and we can I see we got some people jumping on already, so that's good. All right, well, welcome to Credit Versio's Q&A Wednesday live. This is the last one for 2023, December 20th. Here again with John Ulzheimer, formerly with FICO and Equifax. Always good to have you, John. And
Thank you.
today is we'll make this as much of a free for all as we possibly can. So for those who are joining us, feel free to ask whatever question that you want. We try to curb it a little bit and keep it focused on credit building and how FICO works and how credit reports and credit scores work. That's really the aim of the conversation. We'll try to keep it in that neighborhood. And John, that was intriguing. I was just starting to read a little bit about this, but if you want to start with this data breach, yet again, we got another one. When was the big one from Equifax? How long ago was that? That was about what, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
No, it was more than that because
Really?
the lawsuit, the data breach happened, the lawsuits happened, the settlement happened, and the payout happened. So that's several years of the
Yeah.
process. So yeah, that one's been done for a while. But um, I guess I guess Xfinity, which I have my cable and my internet and service through them. I guess they just announced a pretty big data breach, 36 million consumers, give or take.
Mm,
And it was,
God bless.
various information, some personal information, some partial personal information was potentially exposed to the fraudsters, and it's one of those things where you it's like you get the same you kind of ubiquitous advice from people. Check your credit reports, freeze your credit reports.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know what, this is what's the nursery story, the little boy or the Little Red Riding
Yeah.
Hood,
Who cried wolf?
the little boy who cried wolf, and after a while the boy's like, whatever. You become so used to these data breaches, and your information has been exposed
Yeah.
so often. You probably get so many crazy phishing emails from wealthy princes in the Bahamas trying to smuggle $1 billion into the U.S. through your email account. That it's almost become just part of living these days. And I'm not sure people fall for that stuff, but they only need one fool to fall for those types of scams.
Yeah. Well, and I'll admit too that I get on I guess on my Capital One and my Discover app, or when I sign up for something that says, "Hey, we found your email address compromised in such and such area or whatever," and I'm just like, yeah, whatever. Everybody's got everything anyway, and
Yeah,
but
I have that through Discover. It's actually pretty good, kind of a dark web alert system where they see your
yeah,
name and you can opt out of certain databases to the extent you have control over that stuff. I here for the folks who are watching now and for the folks who are going to watch this subsequently, just to give you an idea of how much information is out there that has your name attached to it, go pull your LexisNexis, your
oh
report from
god,
LexisNexis. Mine, I think we've talked about this before, and this is almost comical. Mine was like 450 pages, but I know people have responded. I'm like, bro, you're a lightweight. Mine was like 800 pages. Some of these companies have so much information about you that it literally takes up hundreds and hundreds of pages to look at this as a PDF. So the fact that your first name and last name may have been compromised. I mean, hell, you give that stuff away on Facebook and Instagram and
yeah,
any other number of LinkedIn, any number of social media types of sites, and it's to the point now where it's like, what, your information is just out there. You just kind of have to live with it.
well, and also too, I don't know that people really think through how much access their phone gives. And anytime you're using this for anything, it's being tracked by so many different sources. To where you remember the big iOS update that took place. What is this, about a year and a half ago or so, with the new iPhones not sharing data with Facebook, and that I forgot exactly what it did to Facebook monetarily, but it cut their revenue by 20, 30, 40%, because advertisers started jumping ship because you had no attribution anymore. You couldn't
That's right.
target anybody anymore just because
Not,
a flip of a button, and you had billion-dollar companies jumping ship from Facebook because they had no ability to really target the people that they wanted to target. It's still a problem even to this day. I
yeah.
mean, they've had workarounds, but still, it's a really challenging thing to have to deal with.
So the
Uh,
the interesting point about all these data breaches, and here's kind of the meat of your steak dinner. Here's your steak. Is well, I get it. I can't grab some handle and pull my information out of the system. That's just not a realistic expectation. You don't have the right to do that. There's no, there's no handle you can pull because of some law that allows you to get yourself out of the system. So the real question is as well, what do I do, right? And how do I become a little bit less attractive than my neighbor? And you've probably heard variations of this story a million times over the years, but if I'm in the woods and a bear starts chasing me and you, I don't have to be faster than the bear. I just have to be faster than you, right? And so this is kind of along the lines of that clever little story about being chased by a bear. Is you don't have to make yourself disappear. You just kind of have to make yourself a little bit less attractive than your neighbor, right? And so the what can you do to make yourself a little bit less attractive? Because fraudsters are kind of like the path of least resistance types of criminals. Where why in the world are they going to try to go through high level encryption websites to steal information when they can just go right through someone's back door into all of it? You see what I'm saying? Path of least resistance.
Yeah.
So the first off, any advice that you hear about don't click on links within emails. I mean, look, I'm not going to repeat that. That's like child's play at this point. If you don't know that already, then you're so far behind the curve that you've got bigger problems than an Xfinity data breach. The challenge is that how do you deal with it from a credit reporting perspective? And normally the advice ends at security freezes, right? So you place a security freeze on all three of your credit reports. You've got to do that independently with all three credit bureaus. There is no central source or like a single destination where you can just say, click, freeze all my credit reports. That's not how it works. They are, in fact, independent. Some credit bureaus offer what are called credit locks, which are a little bit different than credit freezes, but they essentially do the same thing. And some lawyers are going to argue that no, you don't have the same rights with a credit lock as you have with a credit freeze. And that's accurate. But for all practical purposes, what you're really trying to do is you're not trying to set up a credit bureau to sue them because they now have that's not why people sign up for credit locks. They just don't want people to access their credit reports unless they have a valid reason and you've given them permission. Well, that's what a credit lock does, all right? So it essentially prevents the freezing anyways. The freezing prevents any access to a credit report from a company that you do not have an existing relationship unless you give permission for them to do so. And you give them permission by thawing your credit reports. Now, that's number one. I always like the double up strategy, right? So the second strategy is to place a fraud alert on the credit reports. And you can do that. Everything that I'm telling you, by the way, David, this was all free. You're not going to have to pay anybody anything to do any of these things. Right. So you can place fraud alerts on your credit reports, which are going to require that the lender takes reasonable steps to ensure that you are, in fact, the person who's applying for credit. And that's generally done through a phone number that you place on your credit report. The lender has to call you. Hey, Mr. Ulzheimer, is this really you applying for a Capital One Visa? And I say, yeah, it's absolutely me. Let the application flow, let it go through, and boom, then they can pull credit reports and things happen in the normal course of business. So does it add a little bit of a hurdle to getting credit? Yes. Is it so meaningful that it's not worth doing? I would argue that it is not that meaningful. And people don't apply. Well, generally, people don't apply for credit that often. It's not like something they do as often as they brush their teeth or comb their hair or get their oil changed. But on the off chance that you're applying for credit once or twice a year, yeah, you're going to have to go through the process of thawing your credit reports and then answering some questions when the lender calls you.
Yeah, I've had to go through that myself when I got my Citi card. Is It didn't come back as an instant approval. I did it at Costco. Ironically, my girlfriend was the one because she was working there at the time, and she's like, "Hey, get a Citi card," and she's like, "Wow, that's weird. It didn't come back. It says processing or requires more information or something like that." And
Yep.
I'm like, "Oh, I think I still have that fraud alert because I think they're 90 days or whatever it was, and I had it on at the time." So I called them up. And they're like, "Oh yeah, we just need to make sure that it was you, and we would have called you or sent you an email." And then they, once I verified it was me, then they approved it and went through the normal channels.
So
But
let me ask you kind of a trick question. Who do you think the fraud alert protects? And who do you think the security freeze protects? I'm just curious what your answer is.
First and foremost, the lender.
That is absolutely correct. You're 100%. All of these, sign up for fraud protection, sign up for credit. You have, for those of you who are watching, go look up your rights under the Fair Credit Billing Act, not the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Fair Credit Billing Act. The Fair Credit Billing Act, among other things, caps your liability for credit card fraud to no more than $50. $50. So someone can open a credit card in your name and charge thousands of dollars. Someone can steal your credit card and your existing credit card and charge thousands of dollars. And unless you just ignore it, which nobody in their right mind would do, unless you just ignore it, the Fair Credit Billing Act caps your liability to $50. Now, on top of that, all of the credit card networks, Amex, Discover, Visa, MasterCard, all have zero fraud liability policies. That's a choice that they've made. So they're not even going to hit you for the $50, even though they could, but they're not going to as a matter of policy, right? So all of these fraud related services, that really protects the lender more than it protects the consumer, because you have no liability for credit card fraud unless you just ignore the fraud.
And you know what this makes me think of, John, is when I know people can be a little cavalier when they're going through the repair process, and they're disputing, everything, which not always a good idea, not a good idea in general. But one of the things that people will dispute is they'll dispute their inquiries from accounts that were already approved, like credit cards. Mm-hmm. And anytime I get asked this question, which I don't much anymore, I'm not really on the phones and I don't have a lot of interaction with our users, but back when I did, it was very customary to say, "Hey, why would you dispute the inquiry from a lender that just approved you?" But now, I mean, you can really understand why that's not a good idea. Is they're looking for that protection. Like, did they just approve somebody that shouldn't have been approved? Why else would you be disputing the inquiry if it wasn't you?
Yeah, look, David, that sometimes we ask these rhetorical questions and we don't really think about the fact that sometimes people just do things for reasons that are inexplicable, right? So I think you and I have collectively have been around for almost half a century. I think we've collectively been in this industry for about 50 years, right? And so it's, when people say, "Oh, I've seen it all," I think that's a fair representation that you and I have probably seen it all. And so it's not uncommon to see people dispute inquiries and give almost every reason under the sun for doing so. And for those of you who are watching, what does that mean, dispute inquiries, where you're writing a letter to the credit bureau and you're saying, "Hey, can you remove these inquiries from my credit report?" And then you generally will give some sort of a reason. And the reason could be as honest as, "I really did apply for credit with them, and this is a valid inquiry. I'm just kind of hoping that you remove it because I don't want it there," to as dishonest as, "Hey, I was, the victim of fraud. That's what I'm going to say today. And therefore, please remove it because I was the victim of fraud," and pretty much every reason in between those two as you can possibly think of. And you're hoping that the credit bureaus delete these inquiries. So that's problematic for a variety of reasons. Notwithstanding the whole dishonesty thing, and look, people have to get up in the morning and look themselves in the mirror and like what they see, and that's their thing, not my thing. If you're willing to write letters that are just fabrications and lies, then whatever. But the credit reporting agencies have an obligation. There's actually provision in the Fair Credit Reporting Act that gives consumers the right to see who's in their credit reports. And that's the only way that the credit bureaus can communicate that, is by maintaining this list of inquiries, which is the name of the company that pulled your credit report and the date that they pulled your credit report. That's it. There's nothing else on your credit report that shows you who accessed your credit report. That's what the purpose of an inquiry is. So it's and by the way, the fact that we're spending time on this further validates my the conclusion that I've reached after being in this credit world for so long, which is that people really ascribe a value to inquiries that just simply isn't there, right? People focus way too much on inquiries. They're practically worthless in your credit score. And no one's really denied credit because of an inquiry. There's usually some other reason. But I get it. I mean, some people will watch the Dave the Bureau Killer YouTube videos and they'll think that they've got to get all these inquiries off their credit reports because that somehow will magically turn their 580 into a 750, which it won't. But, it's all mine. So I guess you have to listen to it.
Yeah, no, and it's still a problem too, even, despite the fact in our tutorial videos and in our lives, which, a very small percentage of the active Credit Versio users, come to the live. It's probably less than 0.5% or something like that. Mm-hmm. But it's something that I see very, very frequently on the occasion where I'm looking into our database or doing some customer support and all. I'm like, oh, what are they disputing? I'm just curious. And I saw a guy the other day that had really nothing on the credit. I mean, good credit scores, really maybe one or two things. I didn't go deep into looking into his credit report, but then I flipped over to see, okay, well, why did he create an account with Credit Versio if he otherwise has, pretty straight credit? And I looked on the back end of it, and he was disputing all of like 20-something inquiries that he had on his credit report. It was like, sometimes you feel like emailing them or calling them and saying, "Listen, guy, you don't really need to do this. It's not necessary. It's not gonna,
If you have that many inquiries, you're so far above the maximum number of inquiries that is allowable in credit scoring systems in order to earn any points and that you really would have to get almost. I'm not going to go too deep on this, but you'd have to get most of those inquiries removed for you to see any movement in your score. So there's that. Number two, and I've kind of adjusted how I talk about this because I think at some point you've got to stop feeding the beast that inquiries are important enough to talk about as if they're their own category. There is no inquiry category in FICO's credit scoring. There is the new account and pursuit of credit category, which includes the consideration of inquiries, but that is not the only metric in that category of metrics. And in its entirety, the new credit or the pursuit of credit category is worth 10% of the points in your scores, which means that the inquiry component is less than 10% because it's a component along with other things in that category. When I was at FICO, and I don't remember if this was a public study that we did, because I need to be careful what I don't want to disclose something that wasn't publicly disclosed, but I'm pretty sure they did publish a study on this when I worked there. But essentially the gist of it is that the vast majority of inquiries, and I'm not talking about the difference between soft inquiries and hard inquiries, I'm talking about hard inquiries, that the vast majority of hard inquiries have no material impact or no measurable impact on your score. So again, they're a bigger fish. They're a bigger fish to fry. And generally when people are like, hey, John, how do I improve my credit score? Limiting inquiries gets thrown in there, but it's almost thrown in there because I have to say more than 2 or 3 things. So it's almost like I have to throw it in with paying your bills on time and staying out of credit card debt.
Yeah. So I'm curious, if we're looking at that 10% of the FICO score, what pursuit of new credit, what else is in there that is factored?
Yeah, it's the time since newly opened accounts is a big one, which is a little bit, I think sometimes people mistake that or confuse that with the average age of the accounts.
Yeah.
That's a different metric. That's a 15% category, so it's actually more important. But
Yeah.
the types of new accounts that you've opened recently and how long it's been since you've opened accounts, those are metrics that are considered. Again, I don't want people to start freaking out when they're hearing this. This is collectively worth 10% of your score points, along with hard inquiries. So it's a really, really small component. I was doing an interview today on New Orleans radio, and one of the callers, my score is an 830, and I'm like, oh God, here we go. I'm going to get a question about why did my score go down 1 point? Oh my God, this is a disaster. That's kind of the stuff that you hear, is that I applied for credit 7 months ago and my score went down 3 points. And what can I do to get those points back? I'm like, bro, you don't need those points. Don't worry about it. Stop listening to me and move on to something else with your day.
Right.
So I tried, it's the bigger fish, right? The bigger fish.
Yeah. When you, I've told people who've called in before, they're like, listen, I'm at a 790 right now, and I got to get to 800 because that number is in their head. I got to see it.
No, you don't.
Yeah, and John, who I had this conversation last with is I had this conversation last with my girlfriend. You know how you always have to have your conversations with your dad, and they seem to go nowhere.
Yeah, that's right. They're circular.
Yeah, right. And so we're just watching some show the other night, and Jennifer has her app on her phone. I forgot what it was, and she I think it was Discover, and she goes, look, my score is like a 790. She's like, but how come it's not an 800? When's it going to be 800? I'm like, oh my God, don't. I said, listen, anytime you're 740 is probably the cutoff for anything that you would ever need for your A paper right now. I said, maybe there's some better mortgage rates, when you hit 750, 760, depending on, who the lender is at the time. But we own our house, so we don't, we're not going to refi. We're not going to buy something else, so there's no need to worry about it.
That's it's an interesting, and I don't know if, and I know Credit Versio is not a typical credit repair company, even by definition of the law. But I've never actually sat down and talked to like a legitimate credit repair company, like a for-profit fee-based credit repair company, and asked them, I mean, in the advice that you give to your customers, are you giving them advice with an end goal in mind? So are you giving them advice to turn their 580 into an 820, or what are you trying to do? Are you just trying to get that number higher by any amount, or are you trying to actually get them to some sort of a finish line, and that finish line equals 760, 720, 840, whatever? And I've never asked that question, which I think I might start doing that now, because I'd be curious to hear what kind of answers that I would get to that. But you bring up a good point. If you look at the published interest rates, the published average interest rates for, let's use auto loans, for example. If you look at the published average interest rates for auto loans, the lowest average interest rates for auto loans, which are not good right now, by the way, but that's not a product of credit scores. That's a product of the environment.
Yeah.
Are for people who have 720 and higher.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if you have a 720 score, FICO score or higher, then you are already falling in the category of having the best published average interest rates in the market. And this is all on FICO's website. If you don't believe me, fine, go to FICO's website. That's a pretty authoritative source of information.
Yeah.
And you can see the same thing on their website. 720 is about 2 points above the national average right now. The average FICO score is about 718, according to the most recent data that FICO published. It was 716 for a while, and it actually went up a little bit to 718. So 720 is not a fantastic score. It's barely above average. So if you're a credit repair company and you're giving advice to your customers, 850 should not be your goal. That is an unrealistic expectation that only a small percentage of consumers can hit. And when they do hit it, it's temporary, right? Because it's almost like boom, 850 and then back down, boom, 850 and then back down. No one holds 850 and just stays there. Usually you hit it and then you come back off of it by some amount of points. So 720 should be the goal vis-a-vis auto loans. Now, mortgages are a different animal. and most mortgage lenders kind of fashion themselves out to be magicians, and I can get anybody a loan, blah blah blah. VA, FHA, Fannie Freddie, USDA, this, that, and the other. And to some extent they're right, because there's just so many options out there available for mortgage loans. I mean, hell, you can have a score of 400 and get a hard money loan if you're willing to pay, crazy, put 50% down and pay some crazy APR for a year for a mortgage loan. But for mortgages, the best published interest rates are 760, and I've heard off the record from mortgage lenders that you kind of need to be closer to 780 if you really want to put yourself in the sweet spot, and that's middle numeric FICO. So not your highest score or your lowest score, but your middle numeric. So I guess the reason I'm spending so much time on this is that the target score really should be about 90 points off of the perfect score. So it's definitely a much more easily achievable number or threshold than someone who signs up for some sort of a credit restoration service and they're like 850 or nothing. It's got to be 850, which is entirely unnecessary. Really, it's 760 or nothing should be your goal.
Well, I can only speak from my experience, at my previous company, which was very hands-on, very consultative, and now the companies that we work with who are white label partners of ours, that I've never heard that as the agenda. The agenda has always been, especially if they're a company that their customers are coming from mortgage companies, is all right, let's consult with the client on, let's find out, let's look at the whole cosmology of the credit report. What is it that they have to work on? Is it a matter of them just being kind of off when it comes to debt to income? Is it all on credit card debt? Is there some way to maybe bundle that up in an installment loan? So it depends on what they're doing as a company. But sometimes it could be, hey, let's just send out some goodwill letters because you got some late payments during COVID and you didn't have a deferment. But maybe we can get. So it just depends on what that goal is. But I've never experienced like a real score centric. Like, okay, now we got to get you to 750 or 800 or something that's unreasonable. Normally, it's a little bit more calculated than that.
Okay.
So for our dedicated small group that is with us, so close to, that's not out Christmas shopping, which I have to do after I get off this, and are here with us. If you have any questions, feel free to post them. What have we been on now for? About a half hour, and I think, John, we're kind of coming to the end of it. Unless somebody wants to post some questions, no need to be on here a lot longer than necessary. But yeah, John, when you said that about not knowing what the agenda is for credit repair companies, I'm like, wow, for a guy that's surrounded by credit repair companies, at least for one seminar out of the year, if not more, you're certainly in a target-rich area if you ever wanted to know how these guys operate.
Yeah, and I to some extent, I'm trying to be polite about the issue. I've been going to the same credit repair events that you've been going to for 17 years. I mean, a long time, right? So it's and the industry has certainly changed over time. Certainly, the Credit Repair Organizations Act forced the industry to change. I mean, it was truly the wild, wild west at one point in time. And now it is a little bit, well, it's absolutely more regulated because we now have a federal statute that governs credit repair. And then you have the CFPB, which hates credit repair and is trying to put them all out of business. So the companies that are in the industry, they've ebbed and flowed over time as far as the quality of the company, the knowledge base of the ownership, and what appears to be kind of like the tactics of the industry, of the company. And so to some extent, I've seen some that are more surgical with their approach, meaning, hey, let's do this, let's do that. And it's more thoughtful as to the advice that's given versus other companies that are like kind of a more nuclear approach, which is let's just get everything deleted and we'll see where the chips fall. We'll just get everything deleted and we'll see where the chips fall. And that can be helpful, right, if they're successful, and it can be harmful if they're successful. It cuts both ways depending on what you're getting deleted.
That's true.
So and we'll see, right? I mean, you and I are both going to a couple of credit repair events in 2024, and we'll see how the industry has evolved since 2023.
Yeah, well, you know, I every time I go to one, at least, well, I won't mention the credit one that we're going to next year, but sometimes I think, man, this is going to be my last one because it seems like it's getting a little. The characters in there are starting to look
Uh,
like they did at 2009, 2010. When
I
because
don't
what
think I
happens
could
is,
give it up. I don't think I could give it up, David. It's it is a fun group. Credit
that's
repair
true.
owners, they're absolutely a fun group. They're not, I used to go to these like American Banker Associations things and mortgage banker. I mean, you talk about stuffy and boring as hell.
Yeah,
Um, it's almost like, is this event over yet? If not, then just put me out of my misery. But credit repair events are straight up fun.
yeah,
It
no
they are
doubt.
a they're a fun group. Um, they like to throw down, which is fun, right? And so and the folks who organize these events have them in fun cities and fun locations,
Yeah,
and they're enjoyable. So for the folks watching, if you're in credit repair, or if you're thinking about credit repair, you should look up some of these events and attend them. There's not that many. I will say that a lot of the really good events have gone away. For COVID killed a lot of them, of course, and some
yeah,
of them never came back. But there are one or two different events a year that are actually pretty good, that have good speakers, reputable speakers. Me, people from the FTC, people from the
yeah,
CFPB, lawyers who practice credit repair related law. Um, so there, sometimes they even have people from different trade associations. So it's not just it's not just a bunch of hacks up there talking about getting things deleted. It's good stuff.
yeah.
So for the folks who are interested, I encourage you to try to go to these events.
Yeah, they're really informative, and even with we've had a couple of white label partners that don't go to any of this stuff. That I'm like, listen, what you're missing a whole world of, especially when it comes to compliance. If we have the FTC there, if we have attorneys there. It was awesome to see last year that Progression, which is Lexington Law, creditrepair.com for those watching don't know,
Mhm.
they had one of their in-house counsel guys there. I forgot the guy's name, but he was up there, and this was in the thick of it. This is when so CFPB really hit Lexington Law hard, and the guy was not afraid to answer some tough questions, and I was one of them that was asking them some questions in the when he did his talk. It was pretty much packed. Um, but yeah, it's a really unique event, and even though you're going to have some characters that kind of come and go in there that are very interesting, it's largely a good group of people who are looking to help people out. All right, so no questions as of now, John. Where are we? 33 minutes. I think we're gonna call it a day.
Okay.
I'll let you go a
End
little
of the
bit
year,
early. What's
give
that?
people an additional 15 minutes of their night back.
Yeah, there you go. And then you and I will continue the conversation that we started before we went live uh, after the holidays, and we'll look forward to that. All right, John. Thanks again for being here. Thanks for those of you who are dedicated enough to stick with us this time and watch this time. And if you have any questions after you're watching this, feel free to post, and I'll swing back around and answer them for you. All right, John. Merry Christmas. If I don't talk to you before the New Year, Happy New Year, and I look forward to connecting with you after the holidays here.
Same to you and everyone watching. Thank you very much.
Take care. All right, bye bye.